Welcome everyone to our series of second video on cloud storage. Today's topic will focus on data security and data sovereignty. Joining me today is Shubhashish Chakraborty, and I am Nishant Kohli. Shub.
Hey folks, I'm Shubhashish. I'm a product management lead in Google Cloud Storage team. I take care of the enterprises and the security and governance needs in Google Cloud Storage. Nishant, it's a pleasure to talk to you again about a bunch of security capabilities we have been building for our customers.
Great. So let's dive a little bit into it. So based on some of our conversations with our customers, security and privacy has been main concern for enterprise customers. We've heard from 52% of our customers concerned about trusting outside vendors. Close to 41 or even a greater number of customers fear security breaches often when thinking about in public cloud. So thinking from those perspective, we talk about data sovereignty and Google with our Google customers. Often they're talking about how do I have ultimate control of my data, or how can I ensure that I have access to grant data encryption and decryption before data gets accessed by myself or someone else externally. I also want to have full visibility and control who access my data, even if that be someone from Google. So Shubhashish, can you talk a little bit about what we're doing? What does data sovereignty really means when we think from Google Cloud's perspective?
Yeah, I think what you showed in the last slide is pretty informative, right? Like if you think of the big enterprise customers in the pre-cloud era, they used to have their own private data centers. They used to have their own, private networks, right? And they were not in a multi-tenanted environment. There was no sort of public internet in between their data centers because they were not in the public cloud. So there was no public internet involved. Uh, and also, I think how the geopolitical shifts are taking place, more and more countries are coming with data protection regulations. And in a very evolving geopolitical environment, a country operating or a company operating in one country, they have concerns that if they have data with a cloud provider which is US based, would the US government want to have some or read some data which belongs to the customer, right? And then beyond sort of data protection regulations, beyond all the geopolitical considerations, just the fact that it's public cloud, there is public internet involved. You saw in the previous slide how people fear breaches, and uh, I think that's where giving customers actionable controls and giving customers complete visibility into their data is super important, right? So from Google's perspective, we have built a bunch of capabilities which together fall in the umbrella of what we call as data sovereignty. By that, what we mean is we give customers full control over who can access their data, and we also give them full visibility over who can and who have accessed their data. And these controls, while there is a lot of visibility, there is near real-time updates and concrete audit trails, but there is also explicit allow deny capability that the customers have, where the customers can explicitly allow or deny a data access request within Google Cloud. And we'll talk about these things in more detail, but you have AXV, which is access sovereignty, and AXT, which is access transparency, right? So while access transparency is all about complete visibility, AXV or access sovereignty is about the control, where the customer is the ultimate arbiter whom the customer gives access to that.
No, that's great, Shub. Let's dive a little bit more into those details. So, you heard from Shubhashish around what does it mean when we talk about from Google's perspective, data sovereignty. And so to do that, there's certain aspects of things, and we'll cover those topics. Encryption and data sovereignty is some of the key things, and there are several feature functionalities. Shub, you'll talk to us about how it helps us achieve that. We'll talk about workload identity federation. And lastly, we'll talk about access transparency, which is one of the key unique differentiators for us. So diving into it, Shub, can you kind of walk us through some of the encryption capabilities and how it kind of stitches together to provide customers that trust that they're looking from a vendor?
Yeah. So, encryption is one of the sort of key pillars of data sovereignty. And one of the big features that we have built with our customer managed encryption capabilities is the idea of external key management. So we have a external key manager product right now, short form EKM. With that, what the customers can do is they can use a hardware security module or like an encryption key manager in their premises or off GCP, right, at the location of their choice. So it gives them data provenance. Customers control where their encryption keys are. Customers control complete lifecycle policy of their keys. Customers also control the access to those keys, like who can actually ask for that encryption key when somebody is trying to decrypt the data. So anytime uh, a customer for their own accesses need to read the data, or say a customer has raised a support ticket with Google and said, hey, can you please move my data from this location to that location, right? Anytime, whether it's a Googler who's accessing the data or is the customer or customer's customer who's accessing the data, when you access the data, when you read the data, or when you even write the data, right, or overwrite the data, the first thing you need is the encryption key for accessing that data at rest. And with external key manager, what happens is a customer can say, this is the source of my encryption keys, and it is with me. And how we have implemented EKM is Google doesn't store your encryption keys. So Google would dynamically, when an access is needed, would reach out to you and ask for an encryption key. And you have complete visibility, you have audit trails, and then you also have an ability to allow or deny Google the access to this encryption key. And from a feasibility and performance perspective, what we have implemented is you can have automated policies so that you can allow or deny based on a policy, ahead of the data access. Because when you have high performance, say, analytics workloads or compute workloads, at the time when an encryption key is needed, at that time, if you are manually allowing and denying, you are going to have timeout errors, right? So all this can be automated ahead of time, and customers can set policies. This also gives customers, we're in a multi-cloud world. So many customers, we see this is a common pattern where they use GCP, but they might also use other public, cloud services. So this is also a great ability where you can centralize the key management so that you are not managing keys in, say, 3 different public clouds, right? And we support a lot of different partners like Thales or Fortinet or FutureX and so on.
No, that's great. Let's talk a little bit more around the visibility that you talked about from a data sovereignty perspective. You talked about accessing the keys, managing the keys. So let's dive a little bit more detail on those.
Yeah. So key access justification, or KAJ, is a big part of AXV, access sovereignty, right? So whether it is with KMS or with EKM, right? So KMS is key management service, is also a framework. Like EKM also works on top of KMS. But think of vanilla KMS as customers storing their encryption keys with Google Key Management Service. And then EKM is like where customers are using their own encryption key management server, right? So in both cases, with key access justification, what customers can do is they can set up automated policies where they have the ability in the policy to allow or deny every single request for a key access, right? And without having access to that key, Google would not be able to access the data. So this is an ability for customers to explicitly allow or deny, which is super strong, and that makes them the ultimate arbiter of their data. Without the encryption keys, like even if Google is having all your data, we can never access the data. Like we can never read the data. Anybody cannot read the data, right? And then this also goes, like KJ also goes hand in hand with the audit trail that I mentioned. So every single action is allowed or denied explicitly. Customers can set policy, but at the same time, there are clear audit trails. So customers can audit them later or even in near real time.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I think some of those capabilities help us kind of drive our ability to give customers that control and governance that they were talking about in some of their concerns. And lastly, encryption, usability, and performance are some key aspects as well. I know we have ability to multi-thread our operations in cloud storage. So let's talk a little bit around how the key management works with those.
Yes. So, like security features are super critical, but if you don't have the requisite usability or if you don't have the right performance, then it sort of becomes a hindrance, right? So we don't want security and usability or security and performance to be sort of two different ends of a fork, right? That should not be a choice a customer have to make. So what we have done is we have seen usage patterns with these capabilities that the customers have, and we have supported customer managed encryption capabilities even in composite uploads. So whether customers want to do parallel uploads or they want to do resumable uploads, this is also good from a resiliency perspective. This is also great from a performance perspective. So this is also a capability customers can leverage with all this set of features.
No, that's great. As you mentioned, if you have great security but not the usability, it's not a value back to the customer. So yeah, we want to constantly think that balance between security and performance at all times. So next, we talked about encryption, giving control to our customers, but let's talk a little bit about identity. What does that mean, again, when it comes to Google Cloud, and what does that mean from a customer perspective? How do they think about identity, and when they think about working in public cloud, what can we do to help them protect their identity and how that manages in our environment?
Yeah, so I think we have talked about like encryption and access, which is a big part of data sovereignty, right? I think the other important aspect is like who can access the data. So first thing is customers having the control on the data access itself. But I think another fundamental aspect is the identity, like who can access the data. So again, customers are also in a multi-cloud world. Imagine before customers came to the cloud, they had their own Active Directory or LDAP servers, right? So they had their, or whatever, Okta and others. So customers used to have their own source of identity. Now, in a multi-cloud world, if a customer has to replicate their identities in 3 different clouds, or even to one cloud, like they have their on-prem or off-cloud identity service with all the identities, with identity policies around them, right? If you have to replicate it to the cloud, it's a continuous activity because their employees may join and leave, and you have to keep replicating. But more importantly, they may also have a concern over security because they have a source of the identity and now they're replicating it, right? So with that regard, workload identity pools, what it allows our customers is customers can keep their source of identity with them, just like EKM allowed them to keep the source of their encryption keys with them, right? So customers can keep the source of their identity with them, and then customers can use. So you can, the customers can, they can define some workload identity pools in GCP, and then within those pools they can drop some resources. For example, they can say this Google Cloud Storage bucket or this set of Google Cloud Storage buckets are part of this workload identity pool. And then what customers can do is the identities from their identity services, which they want to have access to these resources under the workload identity pool, they can set up a federation, identity federation. So in this identity federation, what happens is the identities themselves are being authenticated with the customer's identity service. After they are properly authenticated, they go through a capability with GCP's own identity and authentication service, which is called a secure token service or security token service. So this is basically a OAuth 2.0 based short-lived token service. So in this sequence, what happens is the customer's own identity service authenticates the identity, and then it bridges or federates that identity with GCP through a OAuth 2.0 based, short-lived token service. So this is called as federation, and this is federation at scale for workloads. So this way, customers can access their workloads in GCP. They're using their own identities. They're not having to create identities again in Google with Google identities. So this is another very important and fundamental aspect of security, which gives customers sovereignty. And we support a lot of different identity providers. Whether your identity is in Azure, Active Directory, or whether it's in AWS, or whether you are using your own, identity service. You might be using an on-prem Active Directory. So all those different services are supported.
No, that's great. So, just kind of quick summary. So, from a user or customer perspective, they can manage their users and their own identity services as an individual leaves the organization or leaves the company. They update it once, and now that is automatically validated within a GCP environment. So they don't have to have multiple places where they have to manage the identity and who has access. So it seems like it's a great functionality. Again, back to our simplicity construct and giving the customer better control of their own environment that gives them that capability. So this is great. So let's talk about lastly our access transparency, or AXT. It is one of the unique differentiator capabilities from a Google Cloud perspective that keeps us quite different from other cloud providers. So can you talk a little bit more in depth around what does access transparency means to us, and what does that mean really to our customers in the end?
Sure. So access transparency, we have referred to it at various places. So whether you are using encryption, or whether you are using, identity federation, or whether you are not using any of these capabilities, you are just, accessing your data, right? Uh, Across all different surfaces and ways in which customers interact with GCP and Google Cloud Storage, and also how Google Cloud's own SRE, we have our own SRE, and then there are Google Cloud admins and Google Cloud, support folks, right? So a customer may raise a support ticket to say, hey, I want this data to move from this location to that location for whatever reason, right? There may be a natural calamity about to hit, like there could be a hurricane, for example, right? Or they just want the data to be co-located with some of the data centers for some reason, and they can raise a support ticket. Now, those are really valid reasons why you need maybe a Google SRE or a support person to access a customer data. But then customers want, ideally, solid audit trace where you can see what was the reason due to which a Googler accessed your data, when did they access the data, and where did they access the data, right? So having the right justification, and also having policies where the customer can explicitly allow or deny such access requests, right? So when we looked at AXV, when we looked at access sovereignty with the EKM and encryption, that was when somebody needs access to an encryption key. This is even more fundamental. This is like when somebody needs access. If you don't have access, encryption key is the next step. Like, okay, somebody has access. Now they're trying to get access to an encryption key. So this is even more fundamental. Anytime when a Googler needs access to customer data, AXT gives customers the ability where they can explicitly allow or decline such requests, and it would also have complete audit trail, and it also has like integration with the APIs, and it would be logged, so customers would have the trace, and these things again are near real time. So along with justification, customers have controls and visibility. So AXT, or access transparency, is an industry-leading capability that GCP has at this point, and it's really complementary to AXV, or access sovereignty, and everything else we have talked about in this session.
No, this is great. As you mentioned, giving access and control are some of the key challenges that customers were talking about, and us having that visibility and control through Google Cloud capabilities really gives that customer the trust that they're looking from their vendors. So lastly, just to kind of summarize, I wanted to thank Subhashish for going through some of these details with us, but security is really at the heart of everything Google does. It's in our design. It begins with our design, and it doesn't really end. It's constantly iterative and trying better visibility and control to our customers. With all the data sovereignty requirements with different countries, we are giving customers full control and visibility of their data. We want to ensure that they can not only protect their data at any given time, but also have knowledge of who accessed their data. At the end of the day, data is the most valuable thing that they have. And we want to ensure that when they come to Google Cloud, they feel it's in a trusted environment. And then also not only trusted environment, they have full control of how they manage that data across the board. So hopefully you learned something today. And again, thank you, Subhashish, for joining us and walking us through what does it mean when we talk about data sovereignty at Google Cloud. Thank you.
Thank you, Nishant. It's always a joy to talk to you and to share with our customers all these capabilities we are building for them, which would, hopefully be super useful to them as they migrate more and more of their workloads to Google. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.